Take a breath. Just, take a breath. Before you say anything. Before you type that message. Before you slam that door or send that email or make that call, just pause. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3. That pause. That tiny, almost invisible gap between what happens to you and what you do next. That is where your entire life is decided. Welcome to the Stoic Path. I'm glad you're here today, because what we're going to talk about could genuinely change the way you move through the world. Not in a motivational poster kind of way. Not in a think positive kind of way. But in a deep, practical, real-world kind of way that the ancient Stoics lived and died by. Today's topic: react wisely. Not emotionally. And if you haven't subscribed to the Stoic Path yet, I want you to do that right now. Hit subscribe, hit follow, wherever you're listening. Because every single week, we bring you wisdom that cuts through the noise and gives you tools, real tools, to build a stronger, calmer, more intentional life. Now let's get into it. Segment 1, The Fire That Burns You. Let me tell you about Marcus. Marcus was a project manager at a mid-sized company. Smart guy. Hard-working. Genuinely good at his job. One afternoon, his boss sent him an email in front of the entire team, CC'd everyone, pointing out a mistake Marcus had made on a client report. The email wasn't cruel, but it was public. And Marcus felt it like a slap across the face. He typed a response in about 45 seconds. Defended himself. Pointed out that 2 other team members had reviewed the report and said nothing. Mentioned, not so subtly, that the boss had missed a deadline himself just last month. He hit send. You already know how this ends. Within a week, Marcus's relationship with his boss had turned cold. Within a month, he was passed over for a promotion he had been working toward for 2 years. Within 6 months, he had quietly started job hunting. All of that damage, traced back to 45 seconds of emotional reaction. Marcus didn't have a competence problem. He had a reaction problem. And here's what makes this story so painful: Marcus was right. The public email was unnecessary. The criticism could have been handled privately. His feelings were completely valid. But valid feelings and wise responses are 2 completely different things. The Stoics understood this at a level most of us never reach. Epictetus, a man who was literally born into slavery, who had no control over almost anything in his external world, said this. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Read that again. Slowly. Not what happens. How you react. He wasn't saying your pain isn't real. He wasn't saying injustice doesn't exist. He was saying that the only territory you truly own, the only ground no one can take from you, is the space between stimulus and response. And most of us give that territory away for free, every single day. Segment 2, The Biology of Emotional Hijacking. Now let's talk science for a moment, because I want you to understand why emotional reactions feel so automatic. Why it feels like you don't even have a choice. There's something called the amygdala. It's an almond-shaped cluster of neurons deep in your brain. Its job, in very simple terms, is to scan your environment for threats. And when it detects something it interprets as danger, a harsh word, a public embarrassment, a perceived betrayal, it fires. Fast. Researchers call this an amygdala hijack. Your rational prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that thinks clearly, weighs consequences, and makes wise decisions, it gets bypassed. Your body floods with cortisol and adrenaline. Your heart rate spikes. Your muscles tense. And you are, in that moment, operating almost entirely on instinct. This is why you say things you regret. This is why you fire off texts you wish you could take back. This is why, an hour later, sitting in your car or staring at the ceiling, you think, why did I do that? Because for a few seconds, or a few minutes, you weren't fully you. You were your fear, your anger, your pride, wearing your body like a suit. The ancient Stoics didn't have neuroscience, but they described this experience with stunning accuracy. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, one of the most powerful men in the ancient world, wrote in his private journal, which we now call Meditations. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. He wrote that for himself. Not for us. Not for history. He was talking to himself in his private notebook, reminding himself daily of something he knew he would forget the moment someone insulted him at court, or a military campaign went wrong, or a trusted advisor betrayed him. Even the emperor needed reminding. What does that tell you about the rest of us? Segment 3, The Cost of Emotional Reactions, Stories from the Everyday. I want to give you 3 quick snapshots. Real-life situations. Maybe you'll see yourself in one of them. Snapshot 1, the group chat. Sarah gets a message in the family group chat. Her sister has made a comment, passive-aggressive, as usual, about Sarah's parenting choices. Nothing explosive. Just a little jab, wrapped in a smiley face emoji. Sarah's blood pressure rises immediately. She starts typing. She drafts 3 different responses. Each one more pointed than the last. She sends the 3rd one. The family group chat erupts. Sides are taken. Her mother calls. Her aunt texts. A Sunday dinner is cancelled. A family gathering becomes tense for the next 3 months. Over a comment. Wrapped in a smiley face. Snapshot 2, the traffic. Daniel is running late to an important meeting. A car cuts him off on the highway, not dangerously, just rudely. Daniel leans on the horn. He pulls up beside the driver and exchanges a look. The other driver responds. It escalates. Daniel arrives at his meeting flustered, distracted, and 6 minutes late. He loses the contract. The other driver? He didn't even remember it happened by the time he parked his car. Snapshot 3, the performance review. Angela gets her annual review. It's mostly positive. But buried in the middle is one line, one sentence, where her manager says she sometimes struggles with receiving feedback gracefully. Angela fixates on that one line. She barely processes the 8 positive paragraphs. She goes home and complains to her partner for 2 hours. She spends the next week visibly cold toward her manager. She starts arriving to work with a defensive posture. 6 months later, when her manager is asked to recommend someone for a leadership role, Angela's name doesn't come up. 3 stories. 3 very different situations. One common thread. The emotional reaction cost them more than the original problem ever would have. Segment 4, What it means to react wisely. So what does it actually look like to react wisely? Let me be clear about something first. Reacting wisely does not mean reacting weakly. It does not mean being passive. It does not mean letting people walk over you or pretending you have no emotions. The Stoics were not emotionless robots. Marcus Aurelius grieved the deaths of his children. Seneca felt fear. Epictetus knew what it was to suffer. Wisdom is not the absence of feeling. Wisdom is feeling, and then choosing. Think of it like this. Imagine 2 archers. Both of them feel the wind. But only one of them adjusts their aim before releasing the arrow. The other one just shoots, and the wind carries the arrow wide. Your emotions are the wind. They're real. You feel them. But wisdom is the adjustment you make before you release. So here is what reacting wisely actually looks like in practice. First, the pause. This is the foundation of everything. Before you respond to anything that triggers you, build in a pause. It doesn't have to be long. 3 seconds. 10 seconds. Walk away for 5 minutes if you can. The pause is not weakness. The pause is the space where your rational mind catches up to your emotional body. The Stoic philosopher Seneca said, "Postpone a little, the time for punishment will always be there, but once given, it cannot be taken back." He was talking about anger. But this applies to every emotional response. You can always react later. You cannot unreact. Second, ask the right question. Most of us, in the heat of emotion, ask, "How do I feel?" Or "What do they deserve?" A wise person asks, "What outcome do I actually want from this?" Those are completely different questions. And they lead to completely different responses. When Marcus in our earlier story typed that email, what outcome did he want? To defend his dignity, yes, but ultimately, to be respected and to advance in his career. Did his response achieve that? No. Because he was answering the question, "How do I feel?" instead of, "What do I actually want?" Ask the second question. Always. Third, separate the person from the provocation. One of the most powerful Stoic practices is to examine what is actually happening versus what your mind is telling you about what is happening. Someone criticizes your work. That is the fact. But your mind might be telling you, "They disrespect me, they think I'm incompetent, they're out to get me, I'm not good enough." Those are interpretations. They may or may not be true. And acting on the interpretation rather than the fact is where most emotional reactions are born. Marcus Aurelius practiced what he called objective representation, stripping away all the emotional labels and seeing situations for what they were, plainly, simply, without the drama his mind wanted to add. A criticism is information. It is data. It might be wrong. But your anger at the delivery doesn't make the content less potentially useful, and your defensiveness doesn't make you more right. Segment 5, The Stoic Tool, Negative Visualization and Perspective. Here's a practice that sounds strange until you try it. The Stoics called it premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. In simple terms, imagine things going wrong before they do. Not to be pessimistic. Not to live in anxiety. But to prepare your emotional response in advance. Imagine, tonight, before tomorrow's difficult meeting, that it doesn't go the way you want. Someone challenges you. Someone dismisses your idea. Your proposal gets rejected. Sit with that. Feel it a little. And then ask yourself, if that happens, what would the wise response be? When you've already mentally rehearsed your wise response, the emotional hijack has less power. You've already been there. You've already chosen. Athletes do this. Surgeons do this. Fighter pilots do this. They call it mental rehearsal. The Stoics were doing it 2,000 years ago. And here's the remarkable thing, when you practice imagining the worst, the actual events, which are almost never as bad as your imagination, feel manageable. Your nervous system doesn't spike as hard. Your amygdala doesn't fire as fast. Because somewhere, in some quiet room of your brain, you've already handled it. Segment 6, The Wisdom of Delayed Judgment. Let me tell you about a Japanese concept called ma. Ma is the Japanese word for negative space, the pause, the gap, the silence between notes in music or words in conversation. In Japanese aesthetics, ma is not empty. It is full. It is where meaning lives. The wisest communicators in the world understand ma. They let silence do work. They don't fill every gap with words. They don't respond to every provocation. They let things breathe before deciding what they mean. There's a story about a Zen master who received an insult from a visiting student. The student called him a fraud. Called his teachings worthless. Expected an argument, a defense, an explosion. The master poured the student a cup of tea. Silently. Handed it to him. And said, "Before we continue this conversation, I would like you to taste that tea." The student, confused, drank. "Is it good?" the master asked. "Yes," the student admitted. Then there is still something right in this room, the master said. Let us find more of it. The conversation that followed was one of the students' most important. But it only happened because the master refused to be pulled into the emotional current. Your anger is not always wrong. But it is almost never the right first response. Outro for Part 1, Build Curiosity. Now, we are only halfway through this journey. We've talked about why emotional reactions cost us so much. We've looked at the biology of the hijack. We've explored what wise reaction actually looks like. And we've introduced some of the most powerful Stoic tools for building that pause between stimulus and response. But here is what we haven't talked about yet. What happens when someone truly wrongs you? Not a small slight. Not a traffic irritation. But a real betrayal. A genuine injustice. What does wisdom look like then? Are you just supposed to absorb it and smile? And what about anger? Is all anger bad? Or is there such a thing as wise anger? And perhaps the most important question of all, how do you build this skill into your daily life so that it becomes automatic, so that you don't have to remember to pause, because the pause becomes who you are? Until then, pause before you respond. The wisest thing you'll do today might be the thing you choose not to say. I left you with 3 questions. What happens when someone truly wrongs you, not a small irritation, but a real, deep injustice? Is all anger bad, or is there such a thing as wise anger? And how do you build this into your daily life so it becomes who you are, not just something you try to remember? Let's answer all 3. And let's go deeper than we've ever gone. Segment 7, When the Wound is Real, Reacting Wisely to Genuine Injustice. There is a version of this message that is dishonest. A soft, comfortable version that says, just stay calm, don't react, let it go, as if wisdom means becoming a doormat wrapped in philosophical quotes. That is not what we teach on the Stoic Path. And it is not what the Stoics actually believed. Let me tell you about Cato the Younger. Cato was a Roman statesman who lived during one of the most turbulent periods in Roman history. Julius Caesar was rising to power. The Republic was being dismantled, piece by piece, through manipulation, corruption, and political maneuvering. And Cato watched it all with clear, unblinking eyes. He did not rage blindly. He did not crumble into despair. But he also did not stay silent. Cato opposed Caesar at every turn, not out of personal hatred, not out of wounded pride, but out of principle. He used every legal tool, every political platform, every ounce of his influence to resist what he believed was the destruction of something worth protecting. He was outvoted. He was outmaneuvered. He was ultimately defeated. But he never stopped being Cato. He never let the injustice make him into something lesser than himself. When it became clear that Caesar had won, that everything Cato had fought for was lost, he did not collapse into bitterness. He did not become vengeful or small. He made his final choice with the same deliberate calm with which he had lived his entire life. The point is not the ending. The point is this: Cato reacted to genuine, massive injustice, not with suppression, not with blind rage, but with sustained, principled, intentional action. That is what reacting wisely to real injustice looks like. That question changes everything. Segment 8, The Woman Who Chose Her Response. I want to tell you about a woman I'll call Grace. Grace had built a small business over 7 years. A bakery. Nothing glamorous, but it was hers, every recipe, every customer relationship, every early morning and late night. She had a business partner, a childhood friend, who handled the finances. One day, Grace discovered that her partner had been quietly siphoning money from the business for 2 years. Not a small amount. Enough to have crippled the bakery's growth, enough to have prevented Grace from hiring the staff she desperately needed, enough to represent a profound personal betrayal. When Grace found out, she sat in her car for 45 minutes. She cried. She screamed. She punched her steering wheel twice. She drafted a text message that was, by her own description, something that would have made a sailor blush. And then she deleted it. She called her lawyer instead. Over the next several months, Grace pursued legal action calmly and methodically. She documented everything. She spoke to her customers, her suppliers, and her remaining staff with complete professionalism. She did not post about it on social media. She did not confront her former partner publicly. She did not let her legitimate, burning fury make her reckless. She won her case. She recovered a significant portion of what was taken. She kept her business. She kept her reputation. And years later, when someone asked her how she stayed so composed through all of it, she said something I think about often. I was furious every single day. But I decided that my anger was going to work for me, not against me. I aimed it. She aimed it. That is the difference between emotional reaction and wise response. Wise response doesn't eliminate the emotion. It gives it direction. Your anger, your grief, your sense of injustice, these are not weaknesses. They are fuel. But fuel without direction just burns the house down. Aim it. Segment 9, is there such a thing as wise anger? Now let's tackle this head on, because it's the question that trips people up the most. Is all anger bad? No. Absolutely not. Aristotle, who was not a Stoic but whose ideas influenced Stoic thought, said something remarkable about anger. He said that the person who feels no anger at injustice is not admirable. They are deficient. That a complete absence of anger in the face of genuine wrong is itself a moral failure. The Stoics refined this. They distinguished between what they called passions, raw, uncontrolled emotional states that drive impulsive action, and eupatheiae, what we might translate as good emotions or well-reasoned emotional responses. In Stoic thought, there is a version of anger that is appropriate. They called it wrath in the technical sense, not a burning, blinding rage, but a firm, clear, principled indignation that says, "This is wrong, and I will not accept it." The difference is not in the feeling. The difference is in what drives it and what it produces. Emotional anger asks, how do I hurt them back? Wise anger asks, how do I make this right? Emotional anger is loud and immediate and often destroys the very outcome it claims to want. Wise anger is quiet and sustained and moves toward justice like a river, not in a flood, but in a current that cannot be stopped. Think of the great figures of history who changed the world not by suppressing their outrage, but by directing it. Nelson Mandela spent 27 years in prison. 27 years. When he walked out, he had every reason in the world to burn with the kind of anger that destroys. Instead, he carried what I would call wise anger, a clear, unshakable conviction that something was wrong, channeled entirely into something constructive. He did not forgive because he felt no anger. He forgave because he understood that his anger, unleashed without direction, would destroy not just his enemies but his own people and his own legacy. Wise anger is not weak. It might be the most powerful force a human being can carry. Segment 10, the daily practice, building the pause into who you are. Now we get to the part that matters most. Because everything I've told you today, the philosophy, the stories, the science, none of it means anything if Monday morning arrives and your boss says something dismissive in a meeting and 45 seconds later you've said something you regret. Information doesn't change behavior. Practice changes behavior. So how do you actually build this, the pause, the wise response, into the fabric of who you are? Here are the practices. These are not suggestions. These are the daily disciplines of every person who has ever mastered the space between stimulus and response. Practice 1, the morning intention. Every morning, before your phone, before the news, before the noise of the day begins, take 3 minutes. Just 3. Ask yourself, what is likely to challenge my composure today? What situation, what person, what type of comment or event is most likely to trigger an emotional reaction from me? Name it. Be specific. And then ask, if that happens, what would the wise response look like? You are preloading your wise response before the emotional hijack has a chance to occur. You are, in a sense, deciding in advance who you want to be. Marcus Aurelius did this every morning. The entire first sections of Meditations are essentially his morning intention practice, reminders to himself about what kind of person he intended to be that day, what difficulties he expected to face, and how he planned to meet them. He was the most powerful man in the Roman world. He still needed 3 minutes every morning to remind himself how to be human. You need those 3 minutes too. Practice 2, the evening review. Every evening, before sleep, take 5 minutes for an honest review of the day. The Stoics called this the examination of conscience. Seneca wrote about doing this every night without fail. He would ask himself 3 questions. What did I do well today? What could I have done better? Where did I react emotionally when I could have responded wisely? No judgment. No self-punishment. Just honest observation. Because here is the extraordinary thing about honest self-observation, you cannot observe a pattern without eventually changing it. The simple act of noticing, clearly, honestly, without excuse, is itself a form of practice. Every night you review the moment you snapped at your partner, or fired off that reactive email, or shut down in a difficult conversation, you are building awareness. And awareness is the seed from which wise response grows. Practice 3, the physiological reset. When you feel the emotional hijack beginning, when you feel your heart rate rising, your jaw tightening, your thoughts narrowing, you need a physiological tool, not just a philosophical one. The most effective one is breath work. Specifically, extended exhale breathing. Breathe in for 4 counts. Hold for 2. Breathe out for 6 to 8 counts. Do this 3 times. The extended exhale activates your parasympathetic nervous system, what people call the rest and digest system. It physically counteracts the adrenaline spike. It slows your heart rate. It gives your prefrontal cortex, the wise part of your brain, a chance to come back online. 3 breaths. That's your pause. That's the gap. That's the space where your whole life gets decided differently. The Stoics didn't know about the parasympathetic nervous system. But they knew about the breath. Breathing was central to Stoic practice, not as a relaxation technique, but as a tool for returning to reason. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Confine yourself to the present." The breath does exactly that. It brings you back to this moment, this body, this choice, right now. Segment 11, the mirror principle, what your reactions say about you. Here is an uncomfortable truth that the Stoics never shied away from. Your reactions are a mirror. Not of the person who triggered you. Not of the situation you're in. Your reactions are a mirror of what is unresolved inside you. When someone's comment cuts you unusually deep, it is almost never really about the comment. It is about the wound the comment found. When a certain type of situation sends you into a disproportionate reaction, the situation is not the problem. The reaction is information about something inside you that hasn't been examined. Think about it this way. 2 people receive the same critical email from the same manager. One of them reads it, feels a mild sting, takes note of the feedback, and moves on. The other one is devastated, can't focus for the rest of the day, snaps at their spouse that evening, and loses sleep that night. Same email. Same words. Completely different reactions. Why? Because the second person carries something, an old belief, an old wound, an old story, that the email activated. Maybe a parent who was never satisfied. Maybe a deep fear of being seen as incompetent. Maybe a lifetime of tying their worth to their performance. The email didn't create that. The email found it. Every time you notice an emotional reaction that feels bigger than the moment deserves, get curious. Ask, what is this really about? What did this trigger? What story am I telling about what just happened? That question, followed by honest reflection, will do more for your inner life than any philosophical concept I can offer you. Your reactions, when you're willing to look at them honestly, are a map. They show you exactly where your inner work still needs to go. Segment 12, the relationships that change when you change. I want to paint you a picture of what life looks like on the other side of this work. Because there is another side. I promise you there is. When you build the pause into your daily life. When you develop the habit of asking what you actually want before you respond. When you learn to separate the fact from the interpretation, and the wound from the weapon, something remarkable starts to happen. Your relationships change. Not because the people around you become different people. They don't. Your partner is still your partner. Your boss is still your boss. Your difficult family member is still that person. But the dynamic shifts. Completely. Because you are no longer a predictable emotional machine that certain inputs can reliably set off. You become someone that people cannot easily destabilize. And there is an extraordinary kind of power in that, not aggressive power, not dominating power, but the quiet, unshakable power of a person who knows themselves well enough not to be undone by someone else's behavior. People begin to trust you differently. They bring you their real problems, because they know you won't panic. They seek your counsel, because they know you'll think before you speak. They respect your boundaries, because when you set them, they're set calmly and clearly, not reactively. And you start to experience a kind of internal quiet that is genuinely hard to describe to someone who hasn't felt it. Not numbness. Not detachment. But steadiness. A sense that no matter what comes, you have the resources to meet it. The Stoics called this eudaimonia, often translated as happiness, but more accurately understood as flourishing. Living in full alignment with your highest capacity. Being the most fully realized version of who you can be. That is what is available on the other side of this practice. Not a perfect life. Not a life without difficulty or pain or loss. But a life where difficulty and pain and loss do not own you. Segment 13, the final story, the bamboo and the oak. There is an old story, told in various forms across many cultures, about a bamboo grove and an oak tree standing side by side. A great storm came. Violent. The kind that breaks things. The oak tree, massive, proud, deeply rooted, stood rigid against the wind. It refused to bend. It used every ounce of its strength to hold its shape. And the storm broke it. The bamboo, meanwhile, bent. Dramatically. All the way to the ground in some places. It seemed, at moments, like it would never recover. But when the storm passed, the bamboo rose again. Exactly as tall as before. Exactly as strong. The oak lay shattered. Rigidity is not strength. The tree that cannot bend becomes the tree that breaks. The wisest human beings I have ever encountered, and the wisest figures in the long history of Stoic philosophy, are not people who feel nothing. They are not people who have eliminated emotion from their lives. They are people who have learned to bend without breaking. To feel the full force of life without being destroyed by it. To be moved without being swept away. They are bamboo. React wisely. Not emotionally. Not because your emotions don't matter. But because you matter too much to let your emotions make decisions that your wisdom has to live with. We have come a long way today. We started with Marcus and his 45-second email. We traveled through the neuroscience of the hijack, the wisdom of the pause, the stories of Grace and Cato and the Zen master with his cup of tea. We talked about wise anger, the mirror of our reactions, the daily practices that build wisdom into the body and not just the mind. And we ended with the bamboo. I want to leave you with one final thought. Every single moment of this day, every interaction, every frustration, every small irritation and large injustice, is an opportunity. An opportunity to practice. To pause. To ask the better question. To respond instead of react. You will not get it right every time. Neither did Marcus Aurelius. Neither did Seneca or Epictetus or any of the great Stoics who wrestled with this for entire lifetimes. But every time you catch yourself, even after the reaction, even in the aftermath, when you're sitting quietly and you think, I could have handled that better, that awareness is the practice. That noticing is the work. You are not trying to become perfect. You are trying to become more intentional. One pause at a time. One breath at a time. One wise choice at a time. And if this episode has given you even one tool, one story, one moment of recognition, share it, and NBSP. This is the Stoic Path.